The hush that swept across Le Montelier, the most elite restaurant in Manhattan, was not the comfortable quiet of luxury. It was the kind that pressed down on your skin like mist before a storm. Crystal clinks and murmured conversations dissolved into absolute stillness. All eyes turned to the narrow aisle between tables where a boy, 10 years old, thin as a reed, braces clamped around both legs, was reaching out his trembling hand. "Miss," he whispered, "would you dance with me?" The question came from Ethan Reed, son of Alexander Reed, the billionaire magnate behind Reed Capital. No one was more surprised than the woman he addressed, Camille Brooks, the only black waitress working the floor that night. Camille had served table 9 just 10 minutes earlier, delivering a rack of lamb with practiced grace and the practiced invisibility of someone who understood the unspoken rules of high society. She hadn't expected to be noticed. She certainly hadn't expected this. The pianist, unaware of the storm unfolding, had just shifted into a slow waltz. Across the room, the restaurant manager, Mr. Connors, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued, rose from his post. "Sir, please control your son," he barked at Alexander. "This is not a ballroom, and our staff are not here to entertain." The disdain in his voice cut through the air. Alexander Reed didn't move at first. It was only their second dinner out since the accident, since Ethan had been hit by a drunk driver in their gated neighborhood and lost most of his motor function below the waist, since his wife died 6 months earlier. "Ethan, sit down," Alexander said at last, his voice like granite. Ethan's arm faltered in the air. His fingers curled back slowly, like a flower retreating from frost. And then Camille moved. She didn't speak. Not yet. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the silver serving tray. Her hand slid into Ethan's without hesitation. "I don't dance in aprons," she said softly, then looked directly at Alexander. "But I do accept invitations with dignity." The gasp that rippled through the restaurant was almost audible. Alexander pushed back his chair. "What do you think you're doing?" Camille held his gaze with quiet strength. "I'm following your son's lead, sir." Ethan took a small step. The brakes squealed softly on the polished floor. Camille adjusted her pace to match his exactly. No guiding, no correcting, just mirroring, supporting, trusting. Around them, diners stared, forks frozen halfway to their lips. At one table, a woman in pearls whispered, "She'll be fired tomorrow." Alexander remained seated, though his jaw twitched. He was no stranger to control. His empire was built on it. He had built skyscrapers faster than his competitors, acquired failing banks with a single call, and silenced boardroom dissent with a glance. But now he could do nothing but watch. For 3 long, slow steps, Ethan led. The boy who hadn't smiled in almost a year now wore a look of deep concentration and, just beneath it, shy pride. He was not being pitied or propped up. He was being followed. Camille bowed slightly as they returned to the table. "Thank you for asking me, Mr. Reed," she said to Ethan, voice light but formal. "It was an honor." She turned to leave. "Wait," Alexander said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. Camille paused. "What's your full name?" "Camille Brooks, sir." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a card, matte, cream-colored, engraved with gold leaf. "My office, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Camille took it without comment, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly. "Dad?" Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Why did you stop her?" Alexander looked at his son, not as a responsibility, not as a broken thing to be fixed, but as a person, for the first time in a long time. He had no answer. No one noticed the look Camille gave before she stepped into the kitchen, measured, resolute, and full of something far more dangerous than rebellion: conviction. The marble lobby of Reed Tower shimmered under the morning light. The building itself was a glass and steel cathedral to power, every angle calculated, every surface gleaming. Camille Brooks, in a navy skirt and a pressed white blouse bought from a clearance rack last month, stepped through the revolving doors with her chin high and her nerves buried beneath resolve. No one offered her a greeting. Most barely looked her way. She approached the reception desk. "Camille Brooks, here to see Mr. Reed." The receptionist scanned her discreetly from head to toe, then picked up the phone. "18th floor. Miss Vance will escort you." Camille nodded, adjusted her grip on her well-worn handbag, and stepped into the elevator. She wasn't afraid. Fear had long been burned out of her. Life had taught her that the world rarely expected grace or intellect from women like her. So when they looked surprised, she didn't flinch. She moved forward. On the 18th floor, she was met by Miss Vance, a woman in her 40s, sharply dressed, with a clipboard held like a weapon. "Follow me," she said, then glanced sideways. "Let me guess, he had you fired?" Camille blinked. "I'm sorry." Vance gave a humorless laugh. "It happens. A wealthy client complains, and people like you lose their jobs." Camille's voice remained level. "People like me? You know what I mean. Staff who forget their place." Camille turned her head slightly. "And where exactly is that?" Before Vance could answer, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. "He's ready." They entered Alexander Reed's office, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the Manhattan skyline look almost delicate. He stood with his back to the room, one hand resting on the edge of a steel-framed desk. "Mr. Reed," Camille said calmly. He turned. This time there was no arrogance in his face, only tension, controlled but visible. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming." She remained standing until he motioned toward the chair. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here." "I assumed you'd tell me." He smiled faintly, more a formality than warmth. "You surprised me yesterday." "I wasn't trying to." He nodded. "Do you have an educational background?" Camille's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "I do." "College?" "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. I started a master's in special education, but had to leave to care for my sister." A flicker passed over his face. Surprise, discomfort. "And yet, you're a waitress." "I worked 3 jobs," Camille replied evenly. "The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring children with disabilities when I can find the hours." Alexander moved behind his desk, pulled open a folder. "I did some research." Of course you did, Camille thought. Billionaires don't like being caught off guard. "You co-founded Freedom Moves 6 years ago, a dance-based rehabilitation program." "With my sister Naomi," Camille confirmed. "We serve children with physical impairments. Our grant applications have been routinely ignored." Alexander turned the folder towards her. Photos, kids with walkers, wheelchairs, and bandages, laughing, reaching, spinning. "I believe your proposal crossed my foundation's desk." 3 times, Camille replied. "You rejected it each time. Without reading it, I suspect." His voice was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me yesterday who you were?" "Because that dance wasn't about me." Silence. "I want to hire you, Bonbot," he said at last. "Not as a waitress, as a therapeutic companion for Ethan." Camille tilted her head, analyzing him. "Your son doesn't need a companion. He needs agency. I have the best neurologist in the country, and yet he hasn't smiled in a year," she interrupted gently. "Until yesterday." His eyes flashed. "I'm offering to pay you 5 times what you make." Camille stood. "No." Alexander blinked. No wasn't a word he often heard. "I don't work for people who only see my color or my job title before they see my mind," she said. "And I don't believe emotional wounds can be healed by money." He flushed. "You're turning down a chance to change your life?" "I already changed my life," Camille said, voice steady. "And I built something I believe in. Your son deserves more than someone hired to care. He deserves someone who does." She reached into her purse, took out a business card, and placed it on the edge of his desk. Freedom moves Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 o'clock. Bring Ethan. First class is free. Without waiting for permission, she turned and walked out. Miss Vance gaped as Camille passed. You just turned down Alexander Reed, she hissed. Are you insane? Camille smiled faintly. Maybe, but I'd rather be insane than be owned. The rusted sign above the old brick building read Freedom Moves, its letters fading but proud. The inside, however, pulsed with quiet energy, sunlight filtering through tall windows, soft rhythmic music playing in the background, and a dozen children moving however their bodies allowed. Some in wheelchairs, some with braces, some with prosthetic limbs. Laughter, not limits, filled the room. From the tinted windows of a parked Bentley, Ethan Reed watched in silence, his palms sweating against the armrest. He's not going in, said Naomi Brooks, adjusting the scarf around her neck as she peered through the window beside her sister. Camille didn't answer. She stood by the door of the community center, eyes focused on the car. Men like Alexander Reed don't come to places like this, Naomi muttered. They send assistants, or private doctors, or checks. But Camille just watched. Not with hope, she didn't waste emotions on that, but with something more enduring. Belief. Then, the back door of the Bentley clicked open. Ethan stepped out slowly, legs braced and cautious. He looked toward Camille and smiled, a nervous, fragile thing that made her heart tighten. And then, unexpectedly, the driver's side opened. Alexander Reed emerged. He looked wrong here. His tailored sweater too perfect. His designer shoes untouched by sidewalk grime. He surveyed the building like it were an alien planet. But he had come. I told you he would, Camille murmured to Naomi, not taking her eyes off him. Inside, the children kept dancing. Mr. Reed, Camille greeted as the pair stepped in. She wore jeans and a navy t-shirt with Your Rhythm, Your Rules printed in yellow across the chest. Alexander said nothing. His eyes swept the open room, chaos at first glance. But then he noticed the rhythm, each child moving independently, but in sync with the music and themselves. It looks unstructured, he said. There is structure, Camille replied calmly, just not the kind you're used to. Ethan, wide-eyed, was already halfway across the room, staring at a boy with a prosthetic leg doing a precise spin. Would you like to join in? Camille asked him gently. He turned to his father for permission. Alexander hesitated, then nodded. Go on, I'll be right here. Camille led Ethan toward the group. A child offered him a prop ribbon, and soon Ethan was experimenting, timid at first, but drawn in by the freedom of it. Would you like to sit? Naomi asked, offering Alexander a foldable chair. It's always hardest the first day. For the kids, for the parents. Alexander sat stiffly, watching Ethan. This isn't therapy, he said. I've hired specialists, neurologists, physical therapists. How's that been working for him? Naomi asked quietly. He didn't answer. The door opened again, this time revealing a woman in her 70s, regal in posture, with silver braids pinned into a crown. She walked with a carved cane, her every step deliberate. Dr. Lillian Monroe. Naomi whispered, she's the neuroscientist who designed the methodology, retired from Harvard, runs the research arm of Freedom Moves. Alexander turned sharply. Dr. Monroe, he said, I wasn't aware you were involved. She offered a faint smile. You've rejected my research proposals 3 times, Mr. Reed. I didn't expect to see you here either. You're conducting research here? She nodded. We're tracking how autonomy and movement affects neuroplasticity in children with motor challenges. It's not just dance, it's a framework of freedom, of choice, bonds. Alexander looked stunned. I thought this was a community class. Camille returned just then. It is, but it's also a pilot program grounded in neuroscience. Our results have been promising. Then why are you still waitressing? He asked, more sharply than he intended. Because the program isn't funded, and because men like you ignored us. Realization dawned slowly. You were Dr. Monroe's assistant. Co-author, Dr. Monroe corrected. Camille's theoretical work was groundbreaking. Alexander stared at Camille. You knew who I was at the restaurant. From the moment you walked in. And the dance, it was staged? Not, Camille said firmly. Ethan chose to get up. I chose to follow. Before Alexander could reply, the studio doors opened again. This time it wasn't just more students entering, it was journalists. Alexander stiffened. What the hell is this? The day we publish our first results, Monroe said. We invited the press. You used my son. No, Camille said quietly. You never saw him, I did. In the center of the room, the music stopped. Everyone turned. Ethan was standing in silence. He had removed one of his braces. Alexander rose instinctively, but Camille placed a hand on his arm. Wait. Ethan took a breath. Then, in his hands, he shifted his weight and moved 1 foot forward. Shaky, uncertain, but his. The room erupted in applause. Alexander stared, tears brimming, but refusing to fall. Camille leaned in. That's what Freedom Moves is about. Not perfect steps, but first ones. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed found himself speechless. Around him, applause echoed through the repurposed community hall. Not polite, not performative, genuine. Children clapped. Some parents wiped tears. Ethan stood at the center of it all, still breathing heavily, one brace removed, his right leg visibly shaking. But he was upright. He had taken that step. And he had done it alone. Mr. Reed, a voice interrupted the moment. It was one of the reporters stepping forward carefully. Can we get a comment on your presence here today? We've received reports that the Reed Foundation previously denied funding to this very program. Alexander turned toward the voice slowly. Out of habit, his shoulders squared, the CEO mask sliding back into place. But then his gaze caught Ethan's again. The boy wasn't looking at the cameras. He was focused on another child, helping her balance, gently handing her a ribbon. That was leadership, Alexander thought. Not the kind taught in boardrooms, but the kind born of experience, of empathy. He looked back at the journalist. You know what's hardest, he said quietly, for men in my position? The room hushed. Admitting when we're wrong. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even Camille raised her brows. I'm here today not just as a father, Alexander continued, but as someone who failed to see what was right in front of him. He paused, glancing at Camille and then Dr. Monroe. The Reed Foundation is formally committing to a 5-year full sponsorship of Freedom Moves, including construction of a permanent rehabilitation center modeled on this methodology. Flashbulbs erupted. Naomi clutched Camille's arm. Reporters shouted follow-up questions. Alexander raised a hand. One condition. The room froze again. He turned to Camille. That Ms. Brooks retains full autonomy over the program. No corporate restructuring, no interference. I'm not here to own it, just to support it. Camille didn't speak immediately. She just stared at him, eyes steady, searching for signs of performance. None. She gave a single nod. And for the first time since he walked into the building, Alexander exhaled. 3 months later, the noise of bulldozers filled the air as construction began on the new Freedom Moves Rehabilitation Center. The future, as Camille once described it, was no longer theoretical. It was concrete. Glass walls were planned to let in natural light, therapy studios with adjustable flooring, classrooms for neuroeducation, a rooftop garden for mindfulness sessions. Every inch of the design had been run by parents, therapists, and, most importantly, children. Camille oversaw progress daily, often with Ethan in tow. He had become a quiet fixture on site, sometimes trailing behind workers, sometimes sketching layouts with colored pencils, and occasionally Alexander Reed would appear. He never arrived in a Bentley anymore. Usually in a car he drove himself, in jeans and a blazer, holding a travel mug and, on more than one occasion, a notebook filled with scribbled questions. "You show up to every planning meeting," Camille observed one afternoon as they sat under a tree reviewing floor plans. "I never thought I'd be reading scientific journals at 50, he replied, flipping through a marked-up article on neuroplasticity. "But here we are." She tilted her head. "Is this public image repair, or do you genuinely care?" He paused. "Last week, Ethan asked to remove his second brace." Camille smiled. "I know. He told me before he told you. His previous therapist said that wouldn't be possible for at least 2 more years." "And yet, here we are," she repeated. He looked at her. "You never accepted my apology." "You never gave one," she replied softly. "You redirected funding, changed policy. That's restitution, not repentance." He absorbed the blow without flinching. "Fair." She nodded. "And besides," she added, "some things don't need apologies. They need to change." Alexander looked toward the construction site where Ethan was laughing with other kids. "I used to think power was about control," he said. "But watching him, it's clearer now. It's about presence." Wow. He turned back to Camille. "And you taught me that." She said nothing, but for the first time since their conversation in his skyscraper office, Camille smiled, not out of victory, but recognition. The opening ceremony of the Freedom Moves Rehabilitation Center was unlike anything Alexander Reed had ever attended. There were no red carpets, no champagne towers, no executives in tuxedos, just rows of folding chairs under a white canopy, children in adaptive gear rolling and walking between stations, and music, real music, the kind that invited you to move, not impress. Camille stood at the podium in a simple navy dress, no makeup, no script. She didn't need one. Behind her, photos of children's progress lined the walls, before and after shots, showing not perfection, but persistence. Alexander stood near the back, hands clasped, trying not to draw attention. Not because he didn't belong, but because he finally understood what it meant to let others take the lead. The crowd parted as Ethan walked forward. One brace gone, the second was reduced to a lightweight support on his left leg. He moved differently now, still with caution, but no longer with fear. 3 other children joined him in the center, and together they began a short, choreographed routine. It wasn't flawless. That wasn't the point. Every step was chosen, owned. The final pose ended in laughter and applause. Camille stepped beside Alexander as the children exited. "You didn't rush the stage," she teased quietly. He chuckled. "Didn't need to. He didn't look for me this time." "No, he didn't." Alexander turned to her, more sincere than she had ever seen him. "Thank you." "For what exactly?" "For teaching me to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Reed, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Alexander looked toward Ethan, now helping a smaller child adjust her wrist straps. "Proud," he said, "not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created." "And what's been the greatest lesson for you through all this?" Alexander didn't pause this time. "That true leaders aren't the ones who carve out the path," he said. "They're the ones who dare to follow when someone else finds a better way." 1 year later, Freedom Moves expanded to 3 cities. Camille received the National Pediatric Innovation Award. Her methods were adopted by 2 major hospitals. Naomi became director of program implementation nationwide. Ethan enrolled in a regular school, using only a light cane on rough days. He became a youth ambassador, visiting children's wards, telling them not to wait for permission to move. Alexander attended his first father-son community day without a tie. He didn't offer advice. He just showed up. And for once, that was enough. Message of the story. True power isn't about control. It's about knowing when to step back and letting someone else take the lead.